Well, if you take a look at the wall, you'll see what time it is. That's right. It is Biden time. Welcome to the show. I, as always, am Christian Bladt, joined by Scott Moore, the S-Man himself. Welcome to the show, Scott, and everyone in the chat. Scott and I clearly color coordinated today. Very nice, sort of a, I don't know, was this auburn? It's not really like red that you think of, you know? Well, you have your microphone on mute. So we can't hear you, but
Yes.
yeah. Well, good. I'm glad. And just, you know, it's a good thing that Tamara's not able to join us this week because she would feel left out if she didn't have red on.
That's
But
right.
then you think for a second, kind of blow my mind if she did. Anyway, I wanted to touch momentarily on the former guy. I wanted to talk about former President Trump. You know, this was a show once upon a time called The Trump Report, and it is now Biden time. I wanted to just quickly get your thoughts, Scott, on the, you know, we don't usually have late July be when we talk about any kind of election results, but there was a special election in Texas to fill the seat for Ron Wright. Ron White is one of the blue collar comedians. So not Ron White, but Ron White.
I was like, what?
Yeah, Ron Wright passed away earlier this year after he contracted COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife was running to fill his seat and was given the support of former President Trump. But the winner was instead State Representative Jake Ellzey, who I guess was able to just do a lot more fundraising. And Ellzey got 53% of the vote, and Susan Wright got 47% of the vote. It is very anecdotal evidence, but there's something to be said for it. And the Newsweek headline has the quote in it: Donald Trump bled tonight in Texas. Again, it is one small, completely out of the cycle for when we usually look at elections. But what do you think when you hear that this was the result in this special election?
I mean, look, again, like we talk about this all the time, to be able to read the tea leaves from a special election is always a difficult thing to do. And there's not much that you can read into that saying it was a complete, rejection of a Trump candidate. I will say the district that they're in, though, is a rapidly diversifying district. It's growing. It is not the rural, it's not quite the rural kind of location that it used to be. That would be more of a Trumpian kind of district. So when you look at the demographics, they are shifting, it is changing, and you are seeing that happen. So it's not a complete surprise, but it is a warning again to Republicans that the more that you're tying yourself to Trump, and we've said this time and time again, yes, you can get that base out that's going to be motivated to vote, but that base is not big enough to propel people to victory if they're not in a very Republican area. Even in places diversifying outside of Dallas, where this district was. I don't know how many more times we can say this. I mean, Trump has lost, and essentially lost in 2016, if not for the fluke of the Electoral College. He is not a person that is going to be able to bring people over, and he never worked on expanding his base. And we've said that from the beginning too. During his term, he never expanded his base, and so you're seeing those type of results. So, I mean, it's not a great sign for Republicans, but I wouldn't read too much into it because it's a one-off special election. I mean, it's the same thing. We're going to have a special election out here in California for the recall of Gavin Newsom on September 14th. And it's the same thing. It's very easy to imagine if Democrats don't go out to vote because there's nothing else on there. There's no other draw. People have to actually go out of their way to vote to keep someone in office that they're going to be voting for again in a little over a year. You could see in a world that a Republican could come in with a fractured bunch of Republicans running and squeak to victory with 10% of the vote, and you have a bunch of people. I mean, not that low, but you know what I'm saying? Like, special elections tend to change the dynamic, and there's not something that you can really look at closely as an analog and say, oh, this works or this doesn't work. So yeah, Republicans should be concerned hitching themselves to Trump because we've said that's a losing strategy in the long run. But you can't really look into it too much more on a one-off, especially in the district that it was in too. If it was somewhere that was more rural, I would say there would definitely be more cause for alarm. But it's a one-off.
Yeah, no, I think that the anecdotal evidence is certainly interesting. And look, if he had won by like 80%, I think then, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just sort of, they're both on other, they're basically, if it were a poll, they're both within the margin of error, so,
Mm-hmm.
53 to 47 is pretty much a dead heat, but somebody did win. You were talking about the upcoming recall election that we're going to have here in California. And I was just earlier today reading a story in the LA Times about how the real obstacle for Democrats to overcome is the fact that they will very likely not show up. If Democrats don't vote in that election, what you're saying could very well happen. Yes, there's a lot of Republicans running, none of them with any, real star power. And I'm talking about there's no one equivalent to a Donald Trump, to an Arnold Schwarzenegger. But if not enough Democrats come out, you could really end up with a situation where Gavin Newsom is recalled. Even though that does seem very unlikely, but people do have to get out and vote, or at least mail their votes, or however they do it. But they do have to actually take the time. And I don't know. I think that as that gets closer, it'll be interesting to see, where that lands. And then there's also another upcoming special election. Max Miller in Ohio, who people will remember for allegations that he slapped his ex-girlfriend, former White House press secretary Stephanie Grisham. And former President Trump's quote is, "He's a great guy." That's an article that's on Politico right now, if you want to read more about Max Miller. So it'll be interesting, and then
Well,
sort of
well, and I would say just a quick side note to that. Again, kind of going back to the Trumpian candidates, his competitor, a fellow Republican, is actually outraising him right now in fundraising as well. So yeah, so you are seeing a lot of this stuff happen. And what I'll be curious to see is sort of down the line when we get more to the primaries, and see the Trump-backed candidate for Alaska, let's say, for the Alaska Senate primary against Lisa Murkowski, to see the Trump-backed candidate does in the primaries in places like Wyoming when you're getting closer to those normally scheduled events, and to see how that will be upheld in the long run. So those are the things I'll be more concerned about than the one-off special elections, to see what kind of power he's trying as hard as he can to reshape the Republican Party, and he's done a great job being able to do that, to be honest with you, after everything that's gone on and all the issues that he's dealing with professionally and personally now, with investigations, and now we have the January 6th commission. So to see what his star power will really lend itself, I'll be more curious to see how that works in the primaries against some of these established Republican stars for all intents and purposes, like Alaska. Because Lisa Murkowski, as we all know, or maybe some of us don't, she basically lost the primary, and she had to be a fill-in. People had to write her in as a candidate, and she still won. So, and
yeah.
again, you have to spell her name correctly. Of course, everyone knows that. Her father is a legendary Frank Murkowski. So
Yeah.
she's so established in Alaska. But the point is, she's been through this road before, and she's succeeded. So I will be fascinated to see if she also hasn't announced officially that she's going to run again. But if she does, I'd love to see how that works. There's also a dynamic in play that maybe she'll run as an independent. Alaskans are very big on that as well. They've just had an independent governor recently, Bill Walker. So there is a strain of independence up in Alaska. So I'll be curious about that more than these one-offs. But just that side note, it is interesting that Max Miller's competitor right now is actually raising more money there in Ohio. So I think that's also an interesting little side note too.
Yeah, and I think, look, it could actually, these are small ripples in a very big pond. But if you're a candidate who might be seeking the endorsement of former President Trump for, say, next year, you might think twice. If enough of these, yes, smaller little elections don't go that way. And there's also what can happen where you go out of your way to basically suck up to Donald Trump. George P. Bush did that. And then the former president went and endorsed his opponent. So I think that, and I've seen plenty of tweets that, George P. Bush is the new Ted Cruz, because, of course, George P. Bush is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but his father's Jeb Bush, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
He's the oldest son of Jeb Bush. Yeah.
And Donald Trump was very unkind to Jeb Bush, and some of his nicknames don't stick, but boy, low energy Jeb sure did. He
was unkind to the whole Bush family. So again, but George P. Bush is playing into politics, and he's playing the game, of course, like all these politicians are doing. Because as we've talked about, I think a lot of these politicians wish he would just go away and ride off into the sunset, but he won't do that. So that the majority of these politicians really do not want to have to deal with him. And
exactly.
They could stand up to him, and they could risk losing. But at the end of the day, as we've talked about on this podcast, I'm going to say it again: Trump will never be president again. He's not. So the sooner that they can get past him as being some kind of force in the party, which again is mind-boggling to me, because he lost. He's defeated incumbent president. So it's not even like a celebrated 2-term president that still had a lot of popularity that could go out and people could ride his coattails. He's not that person. So the sooner that they can get past that and stop being so scared of this small group of voters, the better that the Republican Party will be in the long run, the stronger it'll be, and the more open it'll be to having new people join. Because otherwise, they just have to look out here to California to see their future, and it's not going to be good for them nationwide if they don't move beyond this Trump faction. Because we're seeing it right now. So we'll see how it turns out, and how that Max Miller race pans out. But it's, again, these are one-offs, so I don't read much into it. I think the other thing this fall will be interesting. How will the governor races turn out in places like Virginia, New Jersey? They're one of the only places that have these off election year races, and sometimes they can be a sign on how strong a party is doing. And usually they've flipped in the past from the party in office for the presidency, but we've seen Virginia become very blue over the past decade, since 2008, and same thing with Jersey. I mean, they elected Chris Christie, and they've been known to elect very moderate Republican governors like Christine Todd Whitman, who also was a never Trumper. So that'll also be another interesting sign to see this fall, how the turnout for a statewide race goes, especially for these governor races in some of those states as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to circle back, because our pal Storage Yard resident Point Blank asked the question, Scott, do you think Newsom will be recalled?
At this point, I don't, only because the Democratic Party has such a built-in advantage. So even if you don't get the passionate voters to go out and vote, because it is such a specific election, I think it's so much more challenging, as we just talked about, for the Republicans to be able to do that. But if they were to do it, this is their best shot, because to be honest, if they did somehow squeak out a win, because the bare majority said they wanted to recall Gavin Newsom, the fact of the matter is that person is not going to win re-election next year. So there's just, and what we could see is Gavin Newsom comes back and runs again next year if that happens, and now you've got a new you've got Gavin Newsom back in office again. So it's just but I don't see it at this point. Right. The only way I could see that is if somehow he messes up again with something with the Delta variant, and the economy gets shut down, and people are now being reminded of the lockdowns from last year, and that could play into it, because we still have a long ways out here. We've got 7-8 weeks to go. But I at this point, I still don't see it. Just the built-in advantage of the Democratic Party out here. We haven't had a candidate win statewide election in California since 2006, since Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right. And as we talked about, the dynamics have shifted so much, even in those short-term years, of just the amount of Democrats out here, and the shrinking Republican Party, and the independents that lean Democratic. So even though I don't see the people excited to go out and vote, like, I'm not excited to go out of my way to vote either. I mean, but I don't see it being enough to be able to go over the edge there. But there is a world in which that could happen. So at the same time, I would not be completely surprised. I just don't see it at this point happening.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, and I think that it's going to take just incredibly low turnout. But look, there is enough time where, look, I don't think that this story where Newsom had to take his son out of a basketball camp where they didn't make
Hmm.
kids wear masks. I don't think that's not a backbreaking. This him eating at the restaurant at the French Laundry when restaurants were supposed to be closed, and then saying that they were on the patio when they were clearly inside. No, that I think was a much bigger mess up than this. This is just
Hmm.
like, okay, well, now look, my kid's not in that camp. What are you going to do about it? And the only person who really loses from that is his kid who was going to basketball camp. And now he's like, well, great. Now, what do I get to go to computer camp? I mean, it's, you know, and speaking of masks, I think that it has long been such a divisive issue. We talk about it a lot here. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has gone so far as to call Republican leader Kevin McCarthy a moron for posing tougher mask guidelines for vaccinated Americans. I think that since we last did this show, it's really been I think the governor of Alabama had made those comments last week,
She had.
but the change in Missouri is the one of the more as surprising as that was. This is even more so. I mean, that's definitely another spot where, look, you tell people in Southern California to wear masks, you're going to have some people who are upset, but for the most part, they're like, oh, okay, so like me, I was still wearing a mask at the supermarket anyway. So I actually did not change my behavior in any way.
Mine just shifted a bit because I don't like wearing a mask in the gym.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
my only thing because, especially with cardio, it's not comfortable. But I'm doing it, of course. But that's one thing where I'm like, okay, I'm fine wearing it elsewhere. But half the time, it's like when you're in a movie theater or you're at a restaurant or anything, your mask is off half the time, anyways, because
It's
you're
true.
eating or you're drinking. So, and if you're spaced out enough from people, it's never really bothered me. Even when there was a brief window last summer when things were open out in Ventura County because their caseload was lower than LA County. And I remember going to the movies last summer and there was barely anybody in the theater. So it's like, again, I think there's ways of doing it, but I think that Republicans are finally seeing the writing on the wall too, that the more that their constituents get sick, the worse it is, and the worse it is for the economy. So they're finally waking up to, we're not going to get past this pandemic until we get more people vaccinated. And we were seeing very good progress made in the spring, but it has sort of reached this point now, and even out here, that's why we're having the mask mandate, because only half the people have been vaccinated. And we can go into all that in detail. Should a government be forcing employees to get vaccinated or not? I mean,
Well, yeah, that we'll get there
know,
in a second. And
yeah.
I think that the this idea that vaccinated people need to wear the masks, and like, weren't you vaccinated so you didn't have to wear them? The reason why vaccinated people are being forced to wear masks is that unvaccinated people decided that they didn't need to wear masks, and that was counterproductive to all of it. Look, all these projections that we had were with the idea that vaccines were going to continue at the rate they had up until that point, and they just haven't. I mean, here in, I think, California as a whole, I believe it's 61%, which is good for full vaccination, and then 53% have at least one shot. So that's moving in a good direction, but the other numbers are moving in the other way. So I think that that's why they're saying, like, well, you should wear masks again, especially inside. And I think that you have people that, and look, I Scott's right. At the gym, I hate wearing it. It's really hard to breathe, but it's what the rules are, and I figure it out. And look, it's not like I'm benching 300 pounds, so it's I just take my time on the treadmill a little bit more. But I understand why people don't want to do it, but it's also like, well, which one of these freedoms is more important to you? The idea that you don't want to put an unproven and, to be literal, still unapproved medicine into your body. I do understand that approach. I
Hmm.
wish so many people didn't have it, because then we wouldn't be where we are right now. But it's like, well, keep it. If you're not going to do that, you should really wear a mask out of respect to the other people. You know, you can believe what you want, but they're going to need to wear it. But I don't know. I think that, and we've talked a lot about it in recent weeks, so I won't spend too much time on it. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
go, yeah. But I don't know. What were you going to say, though, Scott?
No, I was just saying, I think the definition of freedom has sort of, uh, not to say hijacked, but people have just taken that out of context and what it means. And, there's this sense now that freedom means I can do whatever I want whenever I want. And that's not exactly how it really is. You're not an island that lives by yourself. You're part of a fabric community. Even if you live out in the middle of nowhere, there's still a collective group. There's still things that, for the greater good of everybody, there are things that we have to do, and there are still laws on the book. So, for people to say, "Oh, I have freedom," yes, you do, but that doesn't extend to you get to do whatever you want. That's not really true, because obviously we have laws. We have things. When you get in a car, you have to wear a seatbelt. When you go places, you can't smoke indoors. I mean, so there are always limits that are placed on us
Yeah, sure.
every single day of our lives, and that's where it's this warped sense of, oh, I don't have to wear a mask, because I can do whatever I want. But actually, in fact, if the government is saying you need to wear a mask, then you have to wear a mask. I mean, and again, some people do argue there's too much power given to the government during times of emergencies. And yes, we could argue about that, and to some degree there is. But when it comes to public safety or the public good, there are times where that has to be given up. And yes, to some degree, you don't have to get a vaccine. If your place of employment is requiring you to, then you can get a job. That's what freedom's all about. You don't have to work there.
Yeah.
That is part of freedom. If you don't want to
Yeah.
wear a mask, then you don't go to certain places right now. I mean, that's just the way it is. So yes, you have freedoms, but that doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. It just means that, yeah, if you don't want to work that job because you don't like the mask requirement, then you go get a job where you don't have to wear a mask, or you can work from home. Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, more than 50 years ago, Janis Joplin said, "Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose," and I think that a lot of people take that to great heart. And in the chat, Sam Whitfield says he disagrees. Sam, take a moment to write out your opinion
Exactly.
on that, and then we'll circle back to it. But I do want to talk about, there are states and federal employees are going to be mandated. I think that there's an important distinction that they be vaccinated or tested
Hmm.
weekly. I think it's very
Hmm.
important that they're not being told they have to be vaccinated. I think
Right.
you'll run into a lot of trouble if you tell everybody they have to be vaccinated. You have a lot of people who cannot be vaccinated for whatever reason, but the simple fact is that I don't know of anybody who can't be tested. Do you have an
Right.
allergy to a Q-tip swab? There's, what? I don't even know if they have a blood test. There's a way to be
Sure.
tested, I'm sure, for everybody.
Hmm.
So I'm saying that, you're making the choice. You do still have the choice. You don't need to
Hmm.
be vaccinated, but you're going to have to be tested. And Scott, you work in television production. We both know plenty of people, and a lot of the people that I know, they get tested depending on their job, sometimes 3 times a week.
Yeah.
And that and
Yeah.
and that those are people who are vaccinated, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, same.
That
I had to be tested as well, at least
Yeah,
once a week. And I know I just had this with a crew member actually when I was in Florida. One of the locations we were at mandated that everyone vaccinated or not be tested, and he didn't like it because he felt like the nose test has like given him ear ringing or whatever. So I said, okay, well, you don't have to work this particular location then, because I
yeah,
can't force you to get tested. And then he finally found an alternative pharmacy down the street that was free, and he got the blood test or whatever.
yeah,
So there are options, and you're right. You do bring up a good point that even though they're saying vaccinated, there is that caveat, which is you don't have to be vaccinated. You just have to be tested once a week. But it still goes back to, if you're not comfortable with either one of those things, then unfortunately you can find another job, or you can find something different. And it's no different than students having to be vaccinated. It's no different than if you want to travel internationally and go to a certain country that has a yellow fever, typhoid, or malaria, and you have to go and get, your vaccines for that. It's no different than that. So no one's forcing you to go to those places. No one's forcing you, like you said, to get the vaccine. The alternative is you just have to be tested, which makes sense because a lot of places are, to make sure that everyone's safe and that they're doing what they need to do. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right though, that it is a good distinction about the fact that you don't have to get the vaccine, but you will have to be tested, which is still problematic for some people.
Yeah, no, and I again, it's you don't necessarily have to work there, and I'm only reiterating because I don't want anybody to miss the point.
Hmm.
You don't have to get the vaccine.
Right.
I would actually have a problem with federal organizations saying everybody has to get the vaccine for a variety of reasons. I think, whereas a separate issue is, having your kids get their regular shots so that they can go to school. I'm 100% on board with that. The fact that you get your mumps and rubella shots that, were invented like 100 years ago and are time
Hmm.
tested. Yeah, I do have a problem. I have no problem with that, but this is different. There's a lot of reasons why people aren't getting this, and it's an unknown. So just get tested. And like we just said, we know so many people who do that, that it's hard to really see. I don't know. People, I think, need to be upset about things, and I'm going to bet that the people who are most upset about this are people who don't even have federal jobs. Scott, it's like
Right.
the idea is upsetting, but the act of actually doing it is not. But I think that there's still a matter of choice, and I think that the narrative you just mentioned, Florida, a minute ago. There was a narrative a couple months ago that we all owe Ron DeSantis an apology, but now it seems as though that might not necessarily be the case, and he's got that law in place. So places like Disney World, who might want to force people to be vaccinated to come to Disney World, they actually can't because it's against the law. And I think that you're going to start to see. I think Texas has that as well. Sam has shared his comment with us. He said, "I have no problem with testing at all, but when the government mandates things for the common good, we start to enter a slippery slope. How far is too far?" It's a great question. I don't know what too far is. To me, this isn't, because I do think it's for the common good, that you try to stop the spread. And if more people were getting vaccinated, you wouldn't need to take these moves.
Hmm.
If more non-federal employees were doing it. And Sam, there is definitely a too far. I don't know what it is. Just for me personally, it's not this. What do you think, Scott?
No, I agree. I mean, this is not considered too far to be able to protect people. And it goes back to any other laws. It's like I just use the seatbelt analogy. It's like, yeah, you're driving by yourself, but the government still requires you to wear a seatbelt when you're traveling in a car. It's not an option. And there's some of these things have to happen because of issues where people are not going to do it voluntarily. And so again, for everybody to do it, you have to say you should get tested. You should look at the vaccines and try to be vaccinated, because at the end of the day, it's not only protecting yourself, it's going to protect others as well. And this is the way to get out of the pandemic. I mean, otherwise, that's why a lot of these Republicans are coming around and saying, yes, go get vaccinated. This is why KIV in Alabama said that, because otherwise we're never going to get out of this situation. And it's always going to be there. And it's always going to be there anyways, like we've talked about. But if we can get more of that herd immunity in there, we can basically all go back to living our lives. The same thing could be said on a variety of things, but there are mechanisms in place, thankfully, with our government, where we're not an authoritarian government as much as Trump would like to be. We do have courts and we have other things going on. And case in point, I know Norwegian Cruise Lines is suing the state of Florida for basically saying they can't require people to be vaccinated when they go on their cruise ships. And to me, I agree with Norwegian, because they may start in Florida, but they're going out into international waters. They're leaving the state, and they should be able to make sure that people are as safe and protected as possible, as well as their own employees. And when it comes down to it, it is an economic factor as well, because if you have people getting sick on your cruise lines, you're getting sick somewhere, that's going to reflect on you. And I've said that, when Disneyland was closed and we saw Disney World open up last year, I said, look, Disney's not going to do anything that they don't think that they can make sure they're covered and they're safe, because they have an image to protect and they have an economic reason to make sure things are good. So if they want to be able to ask people to be vaccinated, the state of Florida should allow that as a private business to do what they need to do to protect themselves. And it's an economic interest. So you would think more Republicans would come around to that. But I believe that's why we're starting to see that in some of these other states, because if you frame it in an economic reason, that speaks to a lot of Republicans. And that is a very important thing, to get out of this without having to keep being on these restrictions and keep having to have testing, because getting tested every week is a pain too. So I can understand why people, if they don't get vaccinated, are going to be frustrated. They have to submit themselves to testing every week, because it is annoying, and it is, it's a bit obnoxious, but the easy way out of it is it's just get your vaccine. And we've talked about this. Once it gets that final approval from the FDA, then, I think there really is no more excuse anymore in that sense. We can say there's an excuse right now because it's still emergency authorization, but when we get to that point, it's time for people to either get with it and let's get back to living life, or they can stay isolated forever. It's just, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and unfortunately, I do believe that this issue is not going to go away. And just as you look into your own crystal ball, not Larry Sabato's crystal ball,
right?
but your crystal ball,
Trademark.
If you had to guess, do you expect a state like California to end up with a lot of the freedoms we've enjoyed over the last few months? Do you think we're headed in a direction where some of these like large scale sporting events and concerts and things might actually not happen because things haven't gone the way they planned? Do you think things will be canceled? Do you think that like indoor dining could go away again, the gyms could close again, some of that stuff? Or do you think that Gavin Newsom is very cognizant of you want you want to get a lot of people to turn out to vote, then you go ahead and close everything before not election day, but the day that you vote? What do you think, Scott?
No, I agree with you. It's the latter. I don't think anybody wants to see everything shut down again, and I don't think we'll ever get to the place that we did last year. As we've talked about on the show many times, and that's part of science, is we're learning about this disease more and more every day. And the longer people are on vaccines, we're learning more about how long they hold up without needing boosters. And so, again, the drive right now is to get folks vaccinated. We had to shut things down, back in the winter and everything, because the vaccines weren't out there widely. They are now. So there is not that excuse. So knowing that they're out there and they're available for anyone that wants them would suggest that we won't get to a point that we're going to have to completely shut things down. And even if there are breakthrough cases with people that are vaccinated, the real likelihood is those folks are not going to be seriously ill. And they're not going to require the serious hospitalizations as the unvaccinated. Now, could you see some potential other like capacity issues? Perhaps. There might be some capacity issues put into place. Again, like we've talked about, when you have these bigger events, they might require, which they're allowed to have people either be vaccinated and show their proof, or to go and have a test and show proof within the last 3 days. So that is something that I think will be ongoing, but to completely shut things down, I think we've moved beyond that. And the closest thing I could see is maybe some indoor restrictions with capacity, but I think that's about as far as we will get at this point, because we've got vaccines.
Yeah, and to your point about large scale events, I was just reading that I don't know if it's this weekend or next, but in Chicago, Lollapalooza is happening. It happens as a once a year festival event now, not the way it used to, but everyone has to show proof of vaccination or a negative test to go. And I said last week, and I've said before, I think that is the most likely scenario we're going to have, is, for our economy to not have the NFL have fans in the stands, for, things not to be able to tour, to not have have theater, concerts, all that stuff. And the one way that you can do it is, okay, show us you're vaccinated, and if you're not, you can go and get the test. So it's still having that option, but again, it's as I always say when we talk about this, you shouldn't have to do that to go to the supermarket, which I feel bad for the people who work there for sure. But essentials, but recreation, things that are not a necessity, they're within the rights. People are very, people who are so all in on the free market, right up until it goes against the point that they make, which is free speech is kind of the same way. Well, you should have free speech as long as you agree with me,
Right.
And this is a very aside story before we move on to something much bigger. But the New Jersey Supreme Court, by the way, a Trump supporter was allowed to keep signs all over her yard that say "fuck Biden," and because she's a Trump supporter, and she's got a picture of Trump giving him the finger. Yeah, you can certainly do that. I'm glad that's not in my neighborhood, not because of the political point. I don't want to have to explain to my kids what that word means. That's really what it is. But so that's why, if you believe in free speech, you have to agree that the Ku Klux Klan can peaceably march. I'm not saying that you have to support all activities for an organization like that, but if they're going to march and you want to have somebody march, you have to be okay with it. So when it comes to the free market, if Live Nation, the biggest concert promoter, if you've gone to a concert basically ever in the last 10 years, it's probably a Live Nation event in a Live Nation venue. If they decide that everybody has to show proof of vaccination and or a negative test, because depending on the variants, you might need to ask people for both. If they do that, they're within their rights. They can't have another year like last year where nobody bought tickets to anything. And that's how they're going to save their business. And you can disagree with it because that is your right. But I think that it is the very slippery slope, as Sam mentioned. But it's one thing for the federal government to tell employees they have to do it, but it's like, well, if you want to come to this, you have to show yourself. The Foo Fighters played at a club in Agora Hills, and everybody who went to it had to show proof of vaccination. Well, it's not your right to go see the Foo Fighters. So I believe Ricky Schroeder was protesting there too, just like he was at Costco. Probably down the street from him, if I had to guess. I don't know that he's a Foo Fighters fan. He strikes me more of as like a Jason Aldean guy. But anyway, I really just feel like it's sort of the unfortunate reality we live in. And if the alternative is, do you want events held, or do you want it like last year where nobody did anything?
Well, and to Whitfield Report's comment about
that's Sam. Yeah, that's Sam.
Yeah, Sam talking about Trump.
I'll put it up. You want to call Trump an authoritarian, but have no problem mandating that people carry vaccine records.
But see, I'm not saying they are mandated to. The option is you get COVID tested. Those are your choices. If you want to go out in public, again, those are your choices. You don't have to have your vaccine, but you need to be tested. You're going to a private place like an arena that has multiple people there, and they're going to look out, obviously, again, for their own interest. And again, when you think about it from a Republican standpoint, you would think, or a conservative standpoint, that they would want to support this. This is allowing businesses to have the freedom to make sure that they have a safe environment for all of their guests, because not only are they setting themselves up for safety issues for their guests, but they're also setting themselves up for lawsuits and other issues if you end up having an outbreak somewhere because you're not taking care of your guests when you're in a close proximity with thousands of people in an indoor space. So that's the freedom of the business to be able to say, yes, if we want to make sure that our patrons are safe when they're coming into our facility, you don't have to have your vaccine, but you'll need to show proof that you have been tested and you are negative. And we just saw this when I went to the Clippers game. You see this at some of these bigger events, and that is a business's right. And just like it is for anything else, to be able to make sure that for the people that are coming through their doors, that they have some safety measures in place. Because again, it's either that or everyone's going to have to wear masks, and you're going to have to reintroduce social distancing until we get to a point where there's herd immunity again. So those are the options, really. And that's how it's going to be until we can get past this mentality. I mean, it's just until we can get past these numbers that are continuing to rise right now.
Yeah. And by the way, carrying the vaccine cards is actually not, I think, the preferred way to do this
No.
because of how easily those can be faked. Any of us who are vaccinated, at least here in California, you may not even know that you can go online and get a QR code that actually has your history. It's a little big brothery, by the way, but it's like, oh yeah, I guess they input that after I signed up and made my appointment. But it just shows you had two. In my case, I had the Pfizer, so I had two shots. Here's when I had them, and so that I think that's the kind of proof. And we spent way too much time talking about vaccine passports last week, but that's probably what we're going to need because the physical card, I agree, people shouldn't have to carry it around. I do want to talk about the January 6th commission and comment from David House from a while ago. I'm a Reagan Republican. I hope Trump retires and makes room for a younger conservative. I think most conservatives should feel that way, that the future does not rest well on the shoulders of the former president. Scott, as we're hearing accounts from the hearing yesterday, at the January 6th committee that was hearing testimony from police officers. To me, those comments are exactly why Republicans wanted this to go away, because plenty of them do not like former President Trump. Plenty of them. We commended Mitch McConnell for his comments on that day, not for really anything he said since then, but on that day, I think he spoke how he really felt. But he's all about protecting the brand. So he would prefer that things like this not get out there. But to me, the comments from those police officers, it is in complete contrast to this idea. It's like, what? A bunch of Americans just went and took a walk. It was their right. And it's very much not what happened. And this is exactly why they didn't want there to be, this panel at all. And they're doing everything they can to marginalize it. But at the end of the day, you can't really take away from what the people who were there have to say. What do you think, Scott?
No, I 100% agree. And again, this goes back to what we've said. If Kevin McCarthy had decided, I mean, look, it's a smart tactic if you're playing the political game, because now you can just discount it all, because you can say, well, we have no part of it and they didn't take the people we wanted, so therefore it's just partisan. But the problem with that is, if they had gone in and really had negotiated and done what they needed to do, if he was smarter, he would have just said, let's go ahead and do this commission and have the bipartisan support, get down to the root of the problem, because at the end of the day, we do want to see what really transpired that day, put it out there for the American people. And with the Democrats, the original deal was they would end it by the end of this year, so it would not go into the election year. And again, and I didn't agree with it at the time, because I think if there are leads, they should be able to keep going with it. But that was a great compromise the Democrats did, and then it would be sort of out of the picture before we get to the primaries. Now what's going to happen is this is slowly going to keep trickling out, and you're going to have Republicans like Liz Cheney that are going to be out there as a hardcore 90% plus that's voted with Trump through his term, that are going to be out there. And this is going to continue on well into next year, when they're starting to run for the primaries and then running for the general. And it's going to look worse for Republicans in the long haul, because again, their issue has, they have not expanded their map. Yes, you go back and say they did get some Latino votes at the Texas border, and they picked up some votes from Latino votes in Florida. But again, they're not picking up enough people. They're not picking up those moderates, those moderate Republicans, those moderate women suburban Republican voters. And they're all going to be very turned off as this continues on. So they're doing themselves a disservice in the long run for the short term, what they think is political gain for next year. But yeah, I mean, so now this is just going to be out in the news. And it's not going to be good for Republicans. And part of the reason why they didn't want it is because Kevin McCarthy may be asked to go under oath from that day. So you're going to see people that are going to have to be called out to speak on this matter that don't want to be. And it's going to make Republicans in Congress, some of them, look very, very badly as we get closer to the election. So that's why they want it to go away. But now, unfortunately, it's not. So now there is potentially a political price that's going to be paid.
Yeah, and I don't quite know how it works in terms of, I mean, Kevin McCarthy, serves in the House, and the House is having this. So Can you refuse to testify? This is obviously we miss having our pal Chelsea around all the time, but this would be one of those ones where I think she might know. But I can you is it like being subpoenaed, or is it more of an informal, like, well, it's just a hearing and you're compelled to testify, but you don't have to. Because if all these people are going to have to, the representatives, at least, maybe you can't get the Senate in there. I think that this isn't going to go away anytime soon. And that's what I think. For purely political reasons, it's exactly what Republicans want. Like I said, even if they agree that these actions were terrible and they feel for the police officers, they still don't want to be talking about it. They've got seats to win next year, seats to win back. But I don't know. I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon, even after this committee's over. How many commercials have already been cut together for next year using footage from that day?
Well, that's what we talked about. That's going to be what's going to be out there for all these commercials next year, for political commercials. It's just not going to look good. But to your point, Liz Cheney actually said they should start sending out subpoenas and enforce them. And what we saw during the Trump years is that these subpoenas were not enforced, and they were clogged up with lawsuits and delays, and that's why a lot of times the Democrats just moved and plowed on through, because they were like, we'll be here forever if we wait for them. So of course you can play that game and ignore the subpoenas and take it through the courts, and that just is a long process. So that's probably what's going to happen. But to Liz Cheney's point, she's like, no, we should enforce them. And there are methods to do that. It was just the Democrats did not want to do that last year or 2 years ago for the 2 impeachment trials of Donald Trump. So we'll have to see, are they going to really enforce these subpoenas by any means necessary? And how would that look for them politically if, Kevin McCarthy failed to show up and they have the sergeant at arms basically go and, make him show up or expel him from the House. I mean, so there are tactics they can do, and they just haven't enforced those subpoenas. But she has said that they should be doing it, and they should be aggressive about enforcing them, and that it should be happening across the board. So, we'll see how that plays out, because of course you have the fine line of getting to the truth. But again, Democrats are politicians just like Republicans, and with their razor thin majority in the House, they also want to be careful in how it's going to politically look if they're dragging people in, making it look like a partisan thing. So.
Yes. And by the way, my brother making a rare appearance in here. The Lincoln Project is already broadcasting those commercials. And yes. And, Sam, I don't disagree with this. The entire commission is partisan. We haven't had one committee on any of the riots from July of last year where cities were burning. I agree that this is all partisan, but that's not by design. It is by design from Kevin McCarthy. When you appoint people to it that will be turned down, like Jim Jordan, you're basically saying that you don't want to participate, and that's why you get Kinzinger and Cheney and the usual suspects, really. But I think it would go a long way if there were a bipartisan committee. And the only way you would have gotten that is, I think, if the committee were to convene on January 7th. I think everybody had too much time to think about all the political ramifications. I mean, God, it was almost 7 months ago now, so there's a lot of water under that bridge. I just think that if more things get brought to light that that are supported by the evidence, I think it's important. But I do agree that it is definitely coming off very one-sided. In any case, that's where we'll leave it for today. But there's obviously so much more we could talk about. We appreciate everybody who joined us in the live chat today. As always, we'll be back next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. I believe Tamara will be back. But until then, Scott, if people want to keep in touch with you, how do they do that?
They can follow me at SMan80. That's SMan80 on Twitter. And I will happily talk to people on there if they want.
And you can, as always, find me at ChristianDMZ. And, of course, subscribe to the Bladtcast YouTube channel. You will get this show every time we do it. and our show Marvel Movie Talk, which we did just earlier today, and of course the titular Bladtcast. There have been a lot of great interviews on that show as well. So please subscribe to all of it, and that is all the time we have for today.